My friends, I have been told that today's speaker needs no introduction. It's overblown. We're not going to introduce him. So I hope it is not news to you that this is a very challenging time for those of us who care about humanity, for those of us who love peace, for those of us who care about innocent civilians, and for those of us who love Israel. And in a time of resurgent rage, which has swept not just this country but the world, in a time in which racial hatred and hatred of women and of LGBT people, and the list goes on and on and on. If you can come up with a group's label, somebody hates them. We are called, I believe, to love more relentlessly, more resiliently, deeper than their hate. And so I want to address a piece of that today. I think it's really important because our thinking about Israel tends to be responsive, by which I mean whatever's in the news, that's what we focus on. You know the old Jewish joke about what's the first part of the paper you read every morning? Read the obituary, and if I'm not in it, then I get up and get dressed for the day. So I read papers defensively. I read Jewish news to make sure that nobody that I love is in trouble. And then if they're not, then I go back to the front page of the paper to start from the beginning again. But the challenge is, if our only relationship to Israel is responsive, then we've already lost the core of our strength. And if all we do is respond to the news of the day, then we fracture along political lines. And what I want to address today is a love of Israel deeper than politics. That is to say, we all have very strong opinions about, well, I've been with you guys long enough to know you have strong opinions about everything. But we have strong opinions. Should they reform the Supreme Court in Israel and the judicial system or not? Is it an occupation or is it contested land? Should we hold on to it? Should we not? Should we be, like, all those things we get into fights over. Not just with outsiders, but with each other. And because we focus on those issues, we forget what we have in common. So I'm going to make an assumption today. I'm going to assume that everyone in this room, that all Jews, not all, but a good 90% in the latest polls, have a special identity with Israel. And that is across affiliated, not affiliated, religious, secular, old, young. Jews care profoundly and personally about Israel. Not only that, most American Jews say that a significant part of their own Jewish identity is tied up with Israel. Now, where that gets complicated is that there are a lot of people in the world who want us dead. In a world in which people want you dead, it's very hard to tolerate criticisms. So the minute anyone says anything vaguely critical about Israel, I don't know about you, but I flip onto my propaganda side. I'm the lawyer for the defense, and I'm going to start defending my client, even if I had been complaining about that exact thing in private a minute ago. It's my family, don't you talk about them like that. So I think it's worthwhile spending an afternoon remembering why we love this place, why it moves us like no other place, why it aggravates us like no other place, and why wherever in the world we live, we're always part of us on the way to Jerusalem. Always. So I'm not going to talk about the issues of the day. I'm not going to give you a political prescription for what they should do. Like every living Jew, I know exactly what they should do, but they don't consult with me. But what I can do as a rabbi is remind you why there's a piece of Eretz Israel in your heart. And I want to start, I'm going to make 4 broad points, but I want to start with one of my favorite Hasidic teachings. You know that there's a whole branch of Jewish mysticism that has to do with numbers. Each Hebrew letter corresponds to a number. And so the rabbis play all kinds of math games with the Torah and with Jewish tradition. But they also play math games with our anatomy. So it was Rebbe Nachman of Bratslav who pointed out that the numerical value of the letters Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, are the same numerical value as the number of bones in the human hand. So every time you clap, he says you create the environment of Eretz Yisrael, the atmosphere of Eretz Yisrael with every clap. And I cherish that. You'll often, if you come see me at shul, you'll see me at various points in the service clap and breathe in the smell of Jerusalem, the sun going down in Haifa, the beautiful forests of Tzfat or the beach in Tel Aviv. Can we clap a little Eretz Yisrael right now? Ready? Breathe it in. You carry that with you everywhere you go. All right, so the first love I want to talk about that's deeper than politics is the land itself. How many of you have been to Israel? A lot. Okay. I don't think they do it anymore. I'm one of the people who still flies El Al. Yes, I know they're more polite on American or United. I'm aware of that. And I know that it's cheaper on Delta. I got it. I understand. But years ago, my mother-in-law made me promise that every time I go to Israel, I would go on El Al. And what I know about my mother-in-law, she should rest in peace, is that there was no expiration date to that promise, and that she would find a way to haunt me if I ever broke the promise. So I go on El Al. You remember back in the old days, you'd be on El Al, and the nice thing about El Al, which is also what's aggravating about El Al, is the minute you're in that part of the airport, you're in Israel, right? And polite goes out the window, and people jostle and push and shove you out of the way, and you get into fights with little old people for the airspace above their seat or whatever, or above your own seat, right? Which is just, I love that. And then when you're on the plane and you finally get to the point about 15 hours or so in the flight from California, you see this little sliver of brown on the eastern side of the Mediterranean. And then back in the old days, they would say, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to see the land of Israel. And then they would break out into Hevenu Shalom Aleichem. They don't do that anymore. But I do. Every time I look out the window and I see that sliver of land, I start to sing to myself. And what's amazing is the person sitting next to me joins in pretty soon. We got a rousing chorus going. Because every time I go to Israel, there's a part of me going home. And I say that as someone who is a very proud American, very much You'll forgive me, a proud Californian. And I'm very much at home in this country, and the Pacific Ocean is my ocean. But there's a part of my heart that are on that coast and in those hills. And however long we have been forced to wander, that place is also my place. I've had deep spiritual moments there, walking through the streets of Jerusalem with the sun setting and looking at the way those stones turn golden reddish brown as the sun is setting. Being in the woods surrounding Jerusalem, there are interesting goat farms. You can order a picnic basket in advance and go have a picnic in the Judean forest. Knowing who walked. This is where Elijah confronted the priests of Baal. And this is where Isaiah reminded us, Shalom, Shalom, l'rachok ul-karov, peace, peace to the far and near. And this is where Joshua broke through. You go to these places and that old book comes alive. And you realize how much of that book is about a place. And here's what I want to tell you. You cannot love the earth if you don't love a land. It's not theoretical. It's not conceptual. One of my favorite lines, the cartoonist Charles Schulz had Lucy and Linus in an argument. And Lucy, finally exasperated, said to her brother, I love humanity. It's people I can't stand. You cannot love the earth if you do not love a place. And so God gives us a place to love, not because we then don't love the rest of it, but because our training for how to love a place starts in the land of Israel. That's how we learn to measure the cycles of the years. That's how we learned about the crops and the rainfall. Jews know what time of month it is because not some free calendar you got from a funeral place that's hoping for your business someday. But we look up in the sky, and if I can see the moon, I can tell you what day of the month it is, right? And that moon is a Zion moon. So, love of the land is one of the things that ties me to the land of Israel, deeper than politics. No one and nothing will ever take that out of my heart. The second is the people. So, when I started dating Ilana, my wife, then my girlfriend all those years ago, I started dating an Israeli family. It turns out my wife Ilana grew up in a suburb of Tel Aviv located in the San Fernando Valley. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Her first day of school, she came home very unhappy, and she told her mother that people in the school were very unfriendly, kindergarten people. And her mother said, well, did you speak Hebrew or English? And she said, Hebrew. And she said, try speaking English, they'll be friendlier tomorrow. 2 weeks later, the teacher had them do an exercise where they were supposed to say what they had for breakfast that morning. And when they got to Ilana, she just burst out into tears because she had no idea how you say Beitza ayin in English. Beitza ayin is a fried egg. Her parents were active members of a B'nai B'rith lodge, 500 Israelis. And the way the lodge would meet, they would meet in different people's homes. The parents would be in the living room speaking Hebrew and playing Israeli folk songs, and the teenagers would be in the backyard speaking English. So part of my love for Ilana was it was my way in to Israel. The jostling of an Israeli family. The once they love you forever despite anything. The fact that there's nothing private and that manners are optional. But love isn't, and that love includes being honest and candid and loud and spontaneous, all of which I find profoundly liberating. The stultifying manners of Western society and rich white people can smother you with a lack of oxygen. But 5 minutes with an Israeli and the air is fresh and clear all over again. So I love those people. I'm going to tell you about two of them. I have a really dear friend named Judith Edelman Green. I met her because I have a son who has autism, my son Jacob. And so I'm eager to find people who love people with special needs. And she was an Israeli rabbi, a Reform rabbi, who started the conservative movement's National Bar Bat Mitzvah program. To this day, the conservative movement in Israel runs an amazing program where people with a range of neurodiversity can come up to the Torah and become bar bat mitzvah, which is not permissible in most of the Orthodox synagogues. So they don't just take care of conservative Jews. Lots of Orthodox Jews sneak in. Judith would tell stories of Hasidic men who would come in with their daughter and say, I don't believe in bat mitzvah, but my daughter should have one. And so I met this wonderful Israeli hippie, and Israel to me is Judith Edelman Green. My college roommate, Jeremy Benstein, who grew up in Toledo, Ohio, turns out was an Israeli waiting to happen. And the minute he graduated college, he moved to Israel. And he lives up in the Galil, and he does amazing work on the environment, particularly focusing on Israel and Jewish-Arab cooperation. Trains environmental activists from all over the world who come to Israel to learn what it means to take care of a land and the land. Jeremy is Israel for me. Countries, it turns out, are abstractions. You can't love America as an abstraction. First of all, America has done many disreputable things and continues to, right? But you love a piece of America, and you love lots of Americans, and you love attributes of many Americans. And that's what I do with Israel too. Israel is, for me, family. Share with you an interesting statistic. 85% of the world's Jews live in 5 cities in the world. Want to guess what they are? New York, LA, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, the 5th city, often forgotten and overlooked, is Haifa. Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Haifa, New York, Jerusalem, LA, 85% of the Jews of the world. 90% of the world's Jews live in 2 countries. That's obvious, the United States and Israel, right? So you cannot claim to love Jews and not love Israel. There are just too many Jews there. When I was a kid, the preeminent symbols of Judaism were bagels and cream cheese and Fiddler on the Roof. I don't know when, but at some point pomegranates and palm trees started to appear on Seder plates and hallway decorations and Jewish needlework. But that's the centrality now in our lifetime. The homeland isn't Brooklyn anymore. The homeland is Israel now, wherever you are. So the second thing I love about Israel that's deeper than politics is the people. Third, the culture. Every Friday night, from the time my kids were born, I, like many Jewish parents, would put my hands on my children's head and I would say, "May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh, like Rachel and Leah." And then I would say the words of the priestly blessing, Yivarechecha, right? May the Lord bless you and keep you, that threefold blessing that's found in the Torah. Jews have been saying that to their kids from time immemorial. Many years ago, I was in Jerusalem, and I went to the National Museum, the Israel Museum, and in one of the display rooms, they had a case with a little piece of silver jewelry. It was the size of the thumb, it was flattened foil, and on it were scratched the words that I say to my kids every Friday night. And this came from a place called Ketef Chinom, which is just to the south of the old city from the time of King Hezekiah, Chizkiyahu, which is to say about 800 BCE. And some Jew who was buried there wore around his neck this little piece of silver foil with the ancient blessing on it. I have a copy, if I can get it out of the ties, are terrible things. Here. At some point I'll show it to you. This is not the original. People ask, so I'm just sparing you that. It's not the original, but it is a replica of that blessing. I stood in that museum and I started to weep because I thought, who in the world has a tradition that goes back uninterrupted for 3,000 years? The Greeks have a glorious ancient history, but they don't talk to any of those gods anymore. Right? They don't practice that religion. They're worshiping a Jew. And the Brits are kind of mortified by the way their culture launched. You know, they were running around the northern forest, painting their behinds blue with berry juice when the prophet Isaiah was declaiming words of Tanakh. That, by the way, is not my line. That's Benjamin Disraeli. Right? How blessed are we, Ashreinu? How happy are we that the God that Isaiah chanted to is the one we prayed to this morning. That's our culture. Imagine with me, if news got out that down the road in Houston, they found a small group of Canaanites who trotted out the old Canaanite books, prayed to the old Canaanite gods in the old Canaanite language. You know that there would be news teams from CBS and NBC and MSNBC and Fox News and the New York Times, and like everyone would want to see this wonder of this old, tiny Canaanite tribe still going at it. Well, you witnessed that miracle this morning. Turns out there is one Canaanite tribe that trots out the old book in the old language, talks to the old God, celebrates the old holidays. And the reason the news people aren't here is not because it's too obscure a miracle, it's because it's too frequent. That miracle is happening in every city in North America. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in parts of Africa. It's happening in Asia. It's happening in Israel. We are those people. There are no Hittites or Girgashites or Jebusites doing their old stuff, but here we are. Do you realize how unlikely that is? Do you realize how miraculous that is? And we take it for granted. But it shouldn't be taken for granted. And it started there. So I think of the culture And not just the old culture, because the miracle of Jewish existence is there isn't a break. There isn't a break. Israel has created some of the best poetry of the last 100 years. Some of the greatest works of fiction come in Hebrew from Israeli poets who have rebirthed an ancient language. Who else has done that? I'll tell you a moment last year that for me kind of pulled it all together. You know from last night that I love science. And you know from this talk that I love Israel. And I love history. That you didn't know, but now you do. So it turns out that near Masada, near the Dead Sea, they found a jar with old, dried out date pits. Turns out, Judean pits, Judean dates, were a hot commodity in the Roman Empire. Nobility in Spain and what is now southern France and Italy, Rome, used to pay big money for Judean dates because they were especially meaty and delicious, and they were a delicacy. And modern dates are considerably different than Judean dates. They're great, I'm not criticizing them, but the great big Persian dates that you get that are now grown near Palm Springs, they are not like the Judean dates. We haven't tasted Judean dates for 2,000 years. They found a jar that had been sitting there. So a group of botanists from Israeli universities set about to regerminate these dates. It's very hard to do. Thank God for Israeli science. They did it. There is a male tree which they named Methuselah. There are 4 lady trees, one of whom, no surprise, named Tamar. Tamar is the Hebrew for date. And there's a kibbutz Keturah, that is producing Judean dates. No, you cannot get them online. I tried. But it's another reason to go visit. And when you're on your way down to a lot, pull off at Keturah and go buy yourself a set of dates. Now, let me just warn you up front. Have you ever been to Tiffany's? The stuff in the little blue boxes are cheaper than these dates. Right? But I have a really good friend who stopped at Keturah, and he bought me a fancy box which had 3 Judean dates in them. And it felt like eating everything I love all at once. A date that hadn't been tasted by a human mouth for 2,000 years. A date that was there when my people were in that land and then stopped when my people got kicked out. A date that my people, when we returned, figured out a way to start up again. It blends Zionism and science and history all in a very piquant bite. I love Israel because of that. That to me is a symbol of a people that refuse to quit. We refuse to die. We refuse to go away. And then the last thing I need to talk about is political. We have become awake to the resilience of hate. The way white culture hates black people, the way we hate Hispanic people, the way Asians pay a high price for being seen as alien, the way Arab Americans are assaulted, and the way Jews are hated. And they're not hated for what they do. Hate comes before the reason. Hate comes and then people come up with reasons for the hate. Never, ever justify hate. not the remnants in your own heart, and not when you encounter it. I was on a plane flying back from a speaking opportunity, and I sat next to an African-American woman who's a nurse in Orange County, and she and I were having a great conversation about many, many things. And then when she felt that she could trust me enough, she said, I have to ask you this question: why do people hate Jews so much? And I will just say to you, what I resent about anti-Semites is they don't know Jews like I do. I have a right to hate Jews. But get in line, buddy. Put in the years first, let's get some skin in the game. Why do people hate Jews? So I said, well, I'll answer that question if you'll answer mine. I said, why do people hate blacks? And she looked surprised, and she said, well, it's not because of anything we do. And I said, right, now you answer your question. And she said, I get it. I said, so people come up with things they think about us, and then they use that, but the hate was there when they started looking for reasons. Because people are people. But here's what I want to tell you. So long as anti-Semitism is baked into human cultures around the world, and it is, then I would like a place where we are in control of our own destiny. Thank you very much. I'd like to give it a shot at being on the other end of the gun for a while. I'd like to be the one who owns the big dogs rather than is chased by the big dogs. I'd like to be in a place where I get to be normal. Well, my culture anyway gets to be normal. Personal stuff you can't clean up. But I want to be in a place where living a Jewish life isn't odd or strange or questionable or suspect. And here's the miracle of Israel and of Zionism. And I say that as someone who's quite critical of many of the policies of the Israeli government and much of their political system. But Israel is indispensable to Jewish life around the world. Our president, thank God, even said that publicly. Because the fact that there's a place where Jewish is normal and authoritative, not Judaism, but Jews, determining their own destiny by yelling at each other and fighting each other and subverting each other, which is what we all do in democracies. The fact that we can do that, and then we pay a price for our mistakes. But we have just as much right to screw up as Nigeria or Yemen or Russia or any other country that gets to do dumb things. We have that right just as much as they do. And the fact that we have such a place means even those of us who don't live there, we get to be normal too. Because we know that our political status is a circumstance of where we are, not a character of our being. So I'll say one more political thing, then I want to tell you one more story, then I'm going to close. The one more political thing is, there are two, to my mind, inspiring Jewish experiments going on in the world today. One is the state of Israel, where we get to practice national self-determination in a way unlike any other place in the world. The second is right here in the United States, where we get to be citizens. Citizens have the right to have opinions about everything. We're not here because someone gave us permission. We're here because the Constitution and the Declaration declare us to be equal, because that's built into the American experiment. And what's going on here is equally unprecedented in the world. It's the White House calling. It's okay, tell Joe I'll call him back. I love you anyway. And if it wasn't you, it would be someone. Someone had to, right? Someone is good, Okay, so lucky you, today's your day. There was a picture in the paper of President Biden's grandson coming to have an overnight with his grandfather, in the White House toward the end of December. I don't know if you saw this picture. He was wearing pajamas that were covered with Hanukkah menorahs. And the newspaper didn't report on that. It just said, this kid Biden is coming to be with Grandpa and have an overnight in the White House. But I noticed the menorahs. And I said, God bless America. A country where being Jewish can be so normal that you can be the president's grandson and no one thinks that's worth commenting on. That's amazing. So for all of its significant flaws and its continuing imperfections, God bless America. And this remains one of the great Jewish experiments where we participate in a multicultural democracy as equals. Never happened before. Okay. My childhood was pretty anti-religious. Oh, very Jewishly identified, but not traditionally observant at all. In college, I had a friend whose mother passed away, and he asked me to help him make a minyan. And I don't know what a minyan is, but I'm pretty inventive, so I figured I can help him make one, whatever it is. So I went to a room in which men were sitting on one side and women were sitting on the other, and the men were all dressed in leather. And I'm from San Francisco, so this is not a big deal. But they were wearing these leather boxes, which we don't have in San Francisco by and large. So I was visiting my grandmother for winter break, and I told my Nana that, I'd seen these tefillin, and she said, I think I have a pair. And she went into her closet. Grandmother's closets are magical places. They are magical places. And she dug up on a shelf and she pulled out an old brown paper bag that hadn't been opened since her father died. And in it were my great-grandfather's tefillin, which is what I wear every morning. I put on my great-grandfather's tefillin. Okay. As a dean of a rabbinical school, it's my privilege to go to Israel at least once a year. So I'm on one of my first trips, and back then prices were better, so I was staying at a really nice hotel, which the Mirpeset looked out directly on the old city. And I'm on this Mirpeset wearing my great-grandfather's tefillin in a Jerusalem that is Jewish and free. Do you know what a miracle? How many miracles? If I had told my great-grandfather, if I could go back to 1903 and I could say, listen, Benjamin, someday you're going to have a great-grandson who's going to run a rabbinical school in Los Angeles. He's going to be still wearing your tefillin, and he's going to take them to a Jerusalem that has been reunited under Jewish governance. There's nothing in that sentence that wouldn't have sounded messianic. Hallelujah. We have the privilege, my friends, of living the dream. Dreams come imperfect, but we serve a mighty God, and we have been given an opportunity that our people have prayed for, cried for, died for, exiled for 2,000 years. And it has transformed our sense of pride. If you look at old Jewish art, it's always old, weak people bent over. You look at contemporary art, we found our spines. We breathe the air of freedom and self-determination. So, for all these reasons, the land, the people, the culture, our own character and future, my love of Israel can't be bought or sold. It does not signify agreement with Israeli policy. I reserve the right as someone who loves my country to vehemently disagree with what it's doing, and I reserve that right as a Jew with Israel too. But my love for the United States is deeper than its politics. My love for Israel is in my blood. Shabbat Shalom.